Today we're going to install the conductive rubber upgrade kit that Retroid has been sending out to early adopters of the RP3. Let's see how it goes. Retroid has sent out replacement buttons, membranes, as well as 2 new boards with the upgraded switches for people to install into their new units. These will likely be included in the future, but for now people who bought early units are left to install these ourselves. They've also included a nice little toolkit that hopefully has everything we need and a couple extra screws in case we ruin a couple of those. Kinda hoping this isn't too difficult, so I can easily recommend doing this as a worthwhile upgrade. I'm going to use the included screwdrivers as they intended people to use them to see how they work with the upgrade kit. We need to take off the backplate first, so let's take out the 4 screws holding it in place. With the 4 screws out, make sure to remove your microSD card from inside the unit. Grab the little spudger that they sent over and start opening up the device between the trigger and the shoulder button. Compared to a lot of the other units I've opened up, this one is a lot easier than most. The corner part here is the hardest part to get started. If you use a little bit more force, it should pop out pretty easy though. Once you get that top corner open, just work along this top edge slowly, popping the clips as we go. Pop the other corner open and work down the side of the device. I kinda nicked the edge of the plastic here trying to open it. As long as you're careful, I doubt this is gonna happen to your unit. And with that, the back plate is off. You can tell these are decently solid clips as I didn't break a single one of them, and the back opened up pretty easy. That's great to finally see on a handheld. You generally break 1 or 2 of these clips, no matter how careful you are. We need to get this metal heatsink off next so we can access the internals. You don't need to remove the 4 little screws here in the middle, but I didn't know that until afterwards. The right side of the board won't come up here if you didn't remove those 4 screws. If you did, it'll come off this top part, but you'll still have to take off 1 more screw to get the other side off. It's a shame to see a company like Retroid include one of those warranty void if unscrewed past these point stickers. Guess they really should have thought about that before sending upgrade kits to early adopters. You can also just stick the screwdriver directly into the sticker here, so you don't really need to pull it off. With that last sticker out of the way, we can now remove the last heatsink. Before we remove the board on the D-pad side, we first need to detach the ribbon cable. Carefully disengage the lock before removing it. Don't use any metal tools here, otherwise you could break the locking mechanism. Next, just remove the 2 screws holding the board in place. You don't need to remove the joystick on this side as it's not in our way and it should be easy to get the board out with it in. Make sure the switches on the sides aren't hitting anything when you lift it up. Here's a close-up comparing the two boards side by side. The one on the right here is the upgraded conductive rubber one, which we'll be installing. At this point, you can go ahead and lift out the old rubber membrane. Unfortunately, the D-pad is glued to the membrane, but you can peel it off easily and use your old D-pad with this new kit. These old membranes should come off very easy with relatively little force. Here's a close-up of the two D-pads so you can see the differences on the backs. The upgraded ones look a bit different on the back. They also feel a little bit differently on the new membranes, so try both and see what you prefer more. Pop the black D-pad in place and put the circular membrane from the upgrade kit on the two posts that hold it in place. Attach the ribbon cable to the new board before we install it. It'll become nearly impossible to connect this side with it already installed. When installing the new board, make sure not to hit any of the switches on any of these here, as the switches can pop off quite easily with a small amount of force. Careful up top as well, and make sure that you have room before pushing the board down. Some of these outside buttons might fall into the case a bit, just push them over so they don't get caught into the switches. Reattach the two screws that hold the board in place. Here's a good spot to go through and just to double check all your buttons and switches to make sure that they still work well. You probably want to also make sure that all your screws are wrist tight so we don't have to go back in later if something comes out loose. With the lock still disengaged, we can now install the ribbon cable. This one's a bit tough, but installs easily enough. Engage the lock before we move on. We can see the progress of our work now that the upgraded board and membrane are in. Hopefully you like it so far. A couple people I've talked to prefer the buttons as is without the swaps, so if you prefer them, don't change them. I prefer the face button upgrades more than the D-pad side overall. There's a couple screws on this side that need to be removed first and one ribbon cable. The joystick should come out as well, so it's not in the way when we lift up the board. My left joystick is actually broken, so I can't move forward or right fully, making my characters walk in games in those directions. I've already reached out to Retroid with videos of my issues there, and they said they'll be sending me a couple new joysticks. There's a lot to remove here, just make sure you remember what screws go where. Remember to unlock the joystick ribbon before pulling it out. With the lock disengaged here, stick the round part of the screwdriver behind the ribbon cable to carefully lift up the ribbon cable, all while remembering to hold on to the screwdriver. This side is a bit more difficult to remove, but that's likely because the battery on my unit is slightly higher up on the left side, putting more pressure on the board while trying to remove it. If yours has the same problem, just push slightly down on the left side of the battery while lifting up the board. Now we can remove the old buttons. As you can see, they use some sort of adhesive to glue them down to the membrane. The backs of the buttons are different as you can see, but either work with the upgrade kit. I personally think the black buttons from the kit feel slightly different, but they're pretty close. The openings for the face buttons also show that swapping to an Xbox style layout is impossible since they're proprietary to each opening. That's kind of a shame to see since I'm sure there are a couple people that are going to want that. Either button set will work here if you remove the old ones off the membrane. Let's pop those back in place and finish upgrading this side. Make sure to rotate them accordingly so they fall into place when we lift up the unit. If they're off, just rotate them a little bit. Grab the other membrane included in the upgrade kit and install that onto these two posts. Make sure to grab the correct motherboard for this side. The front looks identical, but the back has a slightly different look where the membrane connects. I recommend sticking the plastic bag under the corner here to hold up the unit so the buttons don't fall out of place. This part here is probably the most difficult part of the upgrade. Lift up the ribbon cable carefully using the round part of the screwdriver and get it on the other side of the motherboard. While letting the board go down, make sure to lift up the plastic buttons on the outside to make sure the switches have room to go into place. Don't put pressure onto the board itself here, just lift up the buttons on the outside. This is where my battery needed to be pushed down here on the left side for my board to fall into place. If the board isn't going down, it's probably stuck on something, so check first before putting any screws in or pushing it down further. The outside buttons on this top corner kept getting stuck for me, but I managed to get it down eventually. My board was getting stuck here on the right side, I just had to push down the battery a little bit and it fell right down into place. You don't want to put any pressure on the board here, just adjust the buttons on the outside and try to move them out of the way so you can put the board down. I've seen a couple units with foam around these buttons. For some reason mine doesn't have any, which is probably making it a little harder than most. With how delicate these switches are, I'm really worried that people are actually going to break a couple of these off. Hopefully Retroid would send you a new board free in that case, but I doubt they would because they would probably be considered damaged. Lift up the ribbon cable a bit so it's correctly in position. Stick the round edge of the screwdriver under the edge here and push down with a plastic smudger if you have one to get it into place. This cable is horribly positioned, and if you don't want to take out the battery, it's extremely difficult to get this one into the slot. Remember to engage the lock afterwards when it's installed correctly. With that out of the way and the device nearly back together, drop the joystick back in place and lock the ribbon cable. There's two small screws holding the joystick that need to be put in. Be careful with how tight you put the screws in here, as the rings around them are plastic. If you unscrewed 4 small screws in the middle here of the heatsink, I recommend putting those back in first so you can put back together in one piece. It's always a good idea to take photos as you go along to make sure you put the screws back in the correct spots. Place the heatsink over the motherboard correctly and put the screws back in. Don't forget the one that had the sticker over top. With all the internals correctly back together, we can put the back panel on now. Make sure to open the SD card slot here as it makes it a lot easier to put it back together. The clips should click nicely when it's sealed and properly shut. Go around the edge quickly and make sure that it's all snapped together nicely. When you're done putting that back together, grab the other screwdriver and put the last 4 screws in the back. Hopefully you found that video helpful. Feel free to ask in the comments below if you have any questions. If you enjoyed the video or found this helpful, make sure to subscribe. As always, thanks for watching. Happy upgrading, everyone.